The assassins thought the hard part was killing Caesar. They were wrong. The hard part was surviving the world they created. On the Ides of March, 44 BC, a group of Roman senators gathered around one of the most famous figures in history. More than 60 men were involved in the conspiracy, though not all would strike the blows. They were aristocrats, former enemies, former allies, men who called themselves liberators. They believed they were striking down a tyrant. They believed one violent morning could restore the Republic. They believed that if Caesar fell, Rome would somehow remember how to breathe without him. The knives worked. The politics did not. Caesar died in the meeting hall of Pompey's theater complex, near the statue of the old rival he had defeated in civil war. His blood stained the robes of men who said they were saving liberty. And then the saviors froze. They had planned the murder with astonishing seriousness. They had not planned the next day with anything like the same discipline. Welcome to the History Docket, where history's greatest disasters are reopened. And before we enter the Senate chamber, give this episode a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me your verdict in the comments as the case unfolds. Because this is not just the story of a famous assassination. It is the story of a political class that understood how to remove one man, but no longer understood how to restore a broken system. Was Caesar the assassin of the Republic? Were Brutus and Cassius its last defenders? Or was the Republic already so damaged that killing Caesar only removed the one man holding the wreckage together? This is the file of the Ides of March. A murder designed as a rescue. A conspiracy built in the name of freedom. A dictator who made mercy political and power personal. A Senate that had lost the habit of governing. And a victory so badly understood by its own authors that it became the opening scene of a larger disaster. Chapter 1: Rome before the knives. The Roman Republic did not die because one man wanted too much power. That is too simple. It had been weakening for generations before Caesar entered the Senate meeting place on his last morning. The Republic was not a peaceful machine suddenly broken by a single ambitious general. It was an old political order struggling with an empire it had never been designed to rule. Rome had begun as a city-state. Its institutions were built for aristocratic competition inside a relatively small political community. Magistrates served short terms. Power was shared, limited, watched, and contested. No king. That was the foundational trauma and the foundational pride of Roman political culture. Kings had been expelled, and no Roman noble wanted to be seen as helping one return. But Rome did not remain a city-state. It conquered Italy. Then it conquered across the Mediterranean. It defeated Carthage. It absorbed kingdoms. It acquired provinces, tribute, slaves, wealth, clients, and military commitments that stretched far beyond the city's old political habits. The Republic became an empire while still pretending it was only a republic. That contradiction poisoned everything. Conquest brought wealth, but wealth concentrated in dangerous ways. Generals became immensely powerful because armies were now campaigning for long periods far from Rome. Soldiers became loyal not only to the state, but to the commanders who paid them, rewarded them, and promised land. Provincial governors could enrich themselves. Political campaigns became expensive. Public life became theatrical, violent, and personal. The old aristocratic rules depended on restraint. But restraint is difficult when the prizes become enormous. By the late 2nd and 1st centuries BC, Rome had already seen political violence inside the city. The Gracchi brothers had tried to push land reform and were killed. Marius and Sulla had turned military power inward. Sulla marched on Rome, became dictator, posted proscription lists, and showed that Roman politics could be settled by armies and executions. He later resigned power, which gave his dictatorship a strange afterlife, proof that extraordinary power could be used and then returned, but also proof that the unthinkable had become thinkable. The Republic survived Sulla, but it did not forget the lesson. A general with an army could dominate Rome. A political enemy could be declared an enemy of the state. Emergency powers could be justified. Violence could wear legal clothing. By Caesar's generation, the Republic was still standing, but its foundation had cracked. The Senate remained prestigious, but prestige is not the same as control. Elections continued, but money and intimidation distorted them. Laws were passed, but street violence influenced them. Magistrates served, but powerful men built networks larger than offices. Rome had become a system where ambitious men could claim to defend the Republic while using methods that destroyed it. That is the first tragedy of Caesar's assassination. The killers were not imagining the crisis. There was a crisis, but they misunderstood its depth. Chapter 2: Caesar learns the game. Julius Caesar was not born as the obvious master of Rome. He came from an old patrician family, the Julii, with prestigious ancestry but not the greatest wealth. He was ambitious, charming, ruthless when necessary, generous when useful, and extraordinarily skilled at understanding what men wanted from him. He was not merely a soldier. He was a politician of rare instinct. Caesar understood debt, spectacle, loyalty, mercy, symbolism, and timing. He knew how to make himself visible. He spent money to build popularity. He cultivated the people. He attached himself to powerful patrons. He survived political danger under Sulla. He rose through the offices of the Republic. He made alliances with men who should have been rivals. The most important of those alliances became known, later, as the First Triumvirate: Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus. It was not an official constitutional body. It was an arrangement among three powerful men who could help each other overcome opposition. Pompey had military glory and veterans needing land. Crassus had immense wealth. Caesar had political talent and ambition. Together, they could bend the Republic more effectively than any one of them could alone. This alliance already showed the problem. The Republic's formal institutions still existed, but major decisions increasingly depended on private bargains among exceptional men. Caesar secured the consulship in 59 BC, and then the governorship of provinces that gave him command in Gaul. What followed changed everything. The Gallic Wars made Caesar. They gave him military glory, immense wealth, loyal legions, and a narrative of conquest. He wrote about his campaigns in clear, controlled prose, presenting himself as the disciplined defender of Roman interests against dangerous enemies. He was not only fighting, he was shaping memory in real time. In Gaul, Caesar became something larger than a politician. He became a commander whose soldiers had followed him through years of campaign, danger, victory, and reward. They knew him. They trusted him. They expected him to protect their interests. That bond between general and army was the Republic's deepest nightmare. Because a magistrate's power was temporary, but a soldier's loyalty could become personal. Meanwhile, the alliance with Pompey and Crassus began to decay. Crassus died in the disastrous campaign against Parthia at Carrhae in 53 BC. Julia, Caesar's daughter and Pompey's wife, had died earlier, weakening the family bond between Caesar and Pompey. Political tensions sharpened. Pompey drifted closer to the Senate's conservative faction. Caesar's enemies wanted him to return to Rome as a private citizen, vulnerable to prosecution. Caesar wanted guarantees. Both sides claimed legality. Both sides feared humiliation. Both sides believed the other was preparing domination. This is how civil wars often begin, not because one side has no argument, but because each side believes losing politically means being destroyed personally. In 49 BC, Caesar crossed the Rubicon with his army. The act was treasonous in the eyes of his enemies, revolutionary in effect, and irreversible in meaning. A Roman general had brought his troops into Italy against the state. Caesar reportedly framed the moment as a cast of the die. Whether the exact famous phrase was spoken, as later remembered, matters less than the fact that Romans understood the symbolic crossing. After the Rubicon, there was no easy return to normal politics. The Republic had become a battlefield. Chapter 3: Victory and the Problem of Mercy. Caesar won. That is one reason he became so dangerous. Had he lost, the Senate might have remembered him as another ambitious rebel destroyed by lawful resistance. But he defeated Pompey's forces, pursued the war across the Mediterranean, and emerged as the dominant man in Rome. Pompey fled to Egypt and was killed there before Caesar arrived. The old rivalry ended not with a Roman trial, not with reconciliation, not with a Senate decree, but with Pompey's severed head presented as a political offering in a foreign kingdom. Caesar reportedly did not celebrate the murder. Pompey had been his son-in-law, rival, and equal. His death was useful, but also ugly. It showed what Rome's politics had become. Caesar then faced the central challenge of every victor in civil war. What do you do with the defeated? Sulla had answered with terror. Caesar chose clemency. He pardoned many enemies. Men who had fought against him were allowed to return. Some were given positions. Some were treated with public generosity. Caesar's mercy became one of the defining features of his rule. But mercy is more complicated than it looks. To supporters, it is magnanimity. To enemies, it can feel like domination. If a man you opposed spares your life, you may owe him gratitude, but you also live under the humiliation of his power to spare. Your survival becomes evidence of his superiority. Your dignity depends on his choice. This was one of Caesar's political miscalculations. Clemency did not necessarily reconcile the aristocracy to his rule. It reminded them that they no longer controlled their own fate. Many of the men he pardoned resented him more deeply because he had made them beneficiaries of his greatness. They could not even claim honorable defeat without also acknowledging his generosity. Among those pardoned was Marcus Junius Brutus. Brutus was no ordinary noble. His family name carried enormous symbolic weight. He claimed descent from Lucius Junius Brutus, the legendary founder of the Republic who helped expel the kings. Whether genealogy and legend perfectly matched reality mattered less than what the name meant. To Romans, Brutus was a name tied to anti-kingly virtue. Caesar treated Brutus with marked favor. He trusted him. He promoted him. Some ancient gossip even suggested a more personal connection through Caesar's past relationship with Brutus' mother, Servilia, though we should not build the history of Rome on gossip. What matters is that Caesar's generosity toward Brutus made Brutus' later betrayal feel especially dramatic. Then there was Cassius. Gaius Cassius Longinus was sharper, harder, more experienced in military affairs, and less wrapped in philosophical hesitation than Brutus. He had served with distinction after the disaster at Carrhae and had his own grievances and ambitions. If Brutus gave the conspiracy moral prestige, Cassius gave it edge. The future assassins, were not all dreamers of liberty. Some were sincere republicans. Some were wounded aristocrats. Some feared monarchy. Some feared losing relevance. Some disliked Caesar personally. Some had benefited from him and hated the debt. Some wanted the old republic back. Some wanted their own status back and called that liberty. The conspiracy would unite these motives under a single word: freedom. But freedom can mean different things depending on who says it. For the Roman people, Caesar's rule could mean order, games, reform, debt relief, land, and the promise of stability after years of elite chaos. For the Senate aristocracy, Caesar's rule could mean the end of their world. Both perceptions were real, and both mattered. Chapter 4: The Dictator Who Would Not Step Back. After victory, Caesar accumulated powers and honors at a pace that alarmed many Romans. He was appointed dictator multiple times, then dictator for 10 years, then dictator perpetuo, dictator in perpetuity, often understood as dictator for life. This title was explosive. Rome had used dictators before as emergency magistrates. The office itself was not illegal, but the traditional dictatorship was temporary, created for crisis, and ended when the task was done. Caesar's dictatorship was different because the crisis never seemed to end, and because Caesar's person increasingly became the answer to every problem. He controlled appointments. He reformed the calendar. He expanded the Senate. He planned colonies. He settled veterans. He launched public works. He considered campaigns against Parthia. He received extraordinary honors. His image appeared on coins during his lifetime, a startling honor in Roman political culture. Statues, ceremonies, special dress, reserved seats, priestly honors, and public gestures piled up. Some honors may have been pushed by flatterers. Some may have been accepted reluctantly. Some may have been politically useful. But politics is not only intention, it is appearance. And the appearance was becoming unbearable to men who believed the Republic had been built on hatred of kings. The most dangerous word in Rome was not dictator. It was rex, king. Caesar never officially took the title of king. He may not have wanted it in the crude old form. He was too intelligent not to understand its danger, but he also did not restore the Republic in any meaningful sense. He remained at the center. His authority remained exceptional. His dominance remained personal. Then came the Lupercalia in February 44 BC. During the festival, Mark Antony offered Caesar a diadem, a symbol associated with kingship. Caesar refused it. The crowd's reaction was watched carefully. The episode was theatrical, ambiguous, and politically poisonous. Was it a staged test to see whether Rome would accept kingship? Was it a clumsy gesture by Antony? Was Caesar sincerely rejecting the crown? Ancient sources differ, and the event had already become propaganda almost as soon as it happened. But the damage was done. The question had been publicly placed before Rome. Would Caesar become king? Even if he refused the diadem, the fear intensified. The conspirators believed they were running out of time. Caesar was preparing to leave Rome for a major eastern campaign against Parthia. Once he left with an army, he might become even more untouchable. Rumors circulated that he might accept the title of king outside Italy, or that sacred oracles suggested Parthia could only be conquered by a king. Whether these rumors were accurate matters less than the climate they created. To men like Cassius, delay looked fatal. To Brutus, hesitation risked dishonor. To others, Caesar's departure would mean the Republic's last chance had passed. They needed a moment when Caesar would be in Rome, unguarded, accessible, and surrounded by senators. The Senate would meet on March 15th at the theater of Pompey complex. The irony was almost theatrical. Caesar would die beneath the memory of the man whose defeat had opened the road to his supremacy. Chapter 5: The Conspiracy. A political assassination is an act of imagination before it is an act of violence. The conspirators had to imagine Caesar dead. Then they had to imagine Rome free. The first image was clear. The second was dangerously vague. The group that formed against Caesar included senators of different histories and motives. Brutus and Cassius became the most famous names, but they were not alone. Decimus Junius Brutus Albinus was especially important and is sometimes underappreciated in popular memory. He had been close to Caesar, served him, and was trusted by him. His betrayal cut deeply because he was not merely an old enemy spared by mercy. He was a friend and ally. The conspirators debated whether to kill Mark Antony too. This was one of their most important decisions. Antony was Caesar's loyal supporter, a consul, a soldier, a man of ambition and force. Some conspirators understood that leaving him alive was dangerous. A coup that kills only the central figure but leaves his strongest lieutenant alive may be unfinished from the moment the knives are drawn. Brutus opposed killing Antony. The reasons were moral and political. If the conspirators killed Caesar alone, they could present the act as tyrannicide, the necessary removal of one man. If they killed Antony too, the act would look more like factional massacre. Brutus wanted purity. He wanted the assassination to be seen as surgical, not bloody revenge. This was noble in appearance. It was disastrous in practice. Antony alive meant Caesar's faction still had a leader in Rome. Antony alive meant the conspirators would face a skilled political operator the very next day. Antony alive meant Caesar's memory could be mobilized. But the conspirators were trapped by their own self-image. They did not want to be butchers. They wanted to be liberators. That self-image shaped their plan. They would not attack Caesar in the street like criminals. They would kill him in a political setting, surrounded by senators, as if the Senate itself were reclaiming the Republic. This symbolism mattered. It also created illusions. The conspirators seemed to have believed that once Caesar was dead, the Roman people and Senate would understand the meaning of the act. They expected that liberty would be self-evident. They expected that the old institutions would revive. They expected that the removal of the tyrant would reveal a republic waiting underneath. But the republic was not a statue under a cloth. It was a political system requiring trust, force, legitimacy, money, armies, procedures, and public consent. The assassins had daggers. They did not have a state. That was the fatal imbalance. Chapter 6: The Ides of March. The morning of March 15th became surrounded by omens in later tradition. Bad dreams, warnings, a soothsayer, a document revealing the conspiracy, Caesar's wife Calpurnia urging him not to go, Decimus persuading him to attend. We must be careful with these stories. Ancient historians loved omens, especially when describing the deaths of great men. The details may be shaped by literary purpose, but the traditions reflect something psychologically true. Later Romans could not believe that a moment so consequential arrived without signs. History often gives disasters omens after the fact. It is a way of saying, surely someone should have known. Caesar nearly stayed home according to some accounts. Calpurnia was alarmed. Sacrifices were unfavorable. The day seemed heavy with warning. But Decimus, one of the conspirators and a man Caesar trusted, reportedly persuaded him to come. To stay away might appear weak. The Senate was waiting. Important business was planned. Caesar went. He did not bring a heavy guard. He had dismissed or reduced aspects of personal protection earlier, perhaps believing that a ruler who needed too much guarding was already politically endangered. Perhaps he trusted his clemency. Perhaps he accepted risk fatalistically. Perhaps he simply misread the hatred around him. In the meeting place, the conspirators gathered near him. The attack began with a petition. Tullius Cimber approached, asking for the recall of his exiled brother. Others crowded around. Caesar refused or resisted. Cimber grabbed at his toga. This was the signal. Casca struck first, according to the common tradition, but the blow was awkward. Caesar fought back. Then the others came in. The scene was chaotic, not clean. Assassinations rarely resemble marble sculpture while they happen. Robes pulled. Bodies pressed together. Steel flashed. Men slipped, shouted, struck, missed, wounded each other. Caesar was stabbed many times. Ancient accounts give 23 wounds, though only one or a few may have been fatal. The number became part of the horror, not one executioner, but a crowd of senators turning the murder into a collective act. The famous line to Brutus, immortalized by Shakespeare, should not be treated as secure fact. Ancient sources differ. Some say Caesar said nothing. Some preserve Greek words. Some emphasize his reaction when he saw Brutus among the attackers. What we can say is that Brutus' presence mattered enormously to the moral meaning of the assassination. Caesar fell. The man who had defeated Pompey died near Pompey's statue. The conspirators had done it. They had killed the dictator. And then came the silence. Not literal silence, perhaps. There must have been screams, panic, footsteps, confusion. Senators fled. The assassins emerged with bloody daggers, calling for liberty. They expected a response worthy of Roman memory. They did not receive one. The people of Rome did not immediately rise in grateful celebration. The Senate did not smoothly resume control. The city did not transform into a restored republic. Instead, there was fear. And fear is a terrible atmosphere in which to launch a political rebirth. Chapter 7: The Empty Victory. The conspirators made their first mistake before Caesar died. They failed to decide what power would replace him. They made their second mistake immediately afterward. They did not seize control. They went to the Capitoline Hill, a symbolic place, a sacred and political refuge. They called themselves liberators. They appealed to the idea of freedom, but they did not control the army. They did not control the treasury. They did not control Caesar's papers. They did not control public emotion. They did not control Antony. Antony withdrew at first, wisely avoiding immediate danger. Lepidus, another Caesarian commander, had troops nearby. The situation was unstable. If the assassins expected the Republic to reappear by moral force, they were quickly disappointed. This is the central failure of the assassination. It was tactically successful and strategically empty. A coup requires more than removing a person. It requires replacing authority. The conspirators had not built a coalition broad enough to govern. They had not prepared a public program. They had not secured military support. They had not neutralized Caesar's loyalists. They had not explained to ordinary Romans why the death of a popular ruler was good for them. To many common citizens, Caesar was not simply a tyrant. He was the man who had provided games, reforms, colonization, debt measures, and stability after years of elite conflict. The senators who killed him were not automatically trusted champions of the people. Many looked like aristocrats defending their own dignity. The assassins thought liberty would be enough. But liberty for whom? For the Senate, for the people, for the old aristocratic competition, for a Rome no longer ruled by one man. Words that thrill philosophers can confuse crowds when bread, pay, land, and security are at stake. Antony understood this better than they did. He began negotiating. A compromise emerged. The assassins would receive amnesty. Caesar's acts would be confirmed. This was an attempt to prevent immediate civil war. Cicero, though not part of the conspiracy, supported compromise. Many senators wanted stability. Nobody knew where the army would stand. Nobody wanted Rome to explode in the streets. The compromise was logical. It was also unstable, because it required everyone to pretend that Caesar could be both tyrant and legitimate ruler. His killers would not be punished. His laws would remain valid. His memory would not yet be fully condemned. His supporters would keep much of what he had given them. This was not a restoration. It was a pause. And Antony used the pause. Chapter 8: The Funeral. Caesar's funeral became the turning point the conspirators failed to foresee. A dead ruler can be more useful than a living one if the right man controls the memory. Antony did not need to invent grief. Caesar had real support. Veterans, urban citizens, clients, friends, and beneficiaries of his rule had reasons to mourn him. But grief needs shape, and Antony gave it shape. At the funeral, Caesar's will was made known. It included public gifts to Roman citizens and left gardens for public use. This was politically devastating for the assassins. The dead man was not presented as a king stealing from Rome, but as a benefactor leaving something to the people. Then came the display of Caesar's wounds, or his blood-stained garment, or a representation of his injured body, depending on which ancient account we follow. The exact staging varies by source, but the emotional strategy is clear. Antony transformed political murder into visible betrayal. The citizens were invited not merely to think about liberty, but to look at wounds. That is not a fair contest. A constitutional argument is abstract. A stabbed body is immediate. The crowd's anger rose. Caesar's funeral pyre became a scene of uncontrolled emotion. Violence followed. The houses of conspirators were threatened. Rome turned dangerous for the men who had expected gratitude. The assassins had killed Caesar in the name of the Republic. Antony made Rome feel that they had murdered a generous father. This is where the conspiracy's moral confidence collapsed. They had assumed the meaning of their act would be obvious. But meaning in politics belongs to whoever can persuade the living. And Caesar's supporters were better at using his death than the assassins were at using his murder. Brutus and Cassius eventually left Rome. That departure said everything. The men who had claimed to liberate the Republic could not safely remain in its capital. Chapter 9: The Heir. Then came the young man almost no one had properly accounted for. Gaius Octavius, Caesar's great-nephew. In his will, Caesar adopted him as his son and principal heir. The young man took Caesar's name. Historians usually call him Octavian during this period, though that was not how he preferred to present himself. Later, he would become Augustus. He was 18. That fact tempted many older politicians to underestimate him. They would pay heavily for the mistake. Octavian was not yet the master of Rome. He did not command Caesar's full network automatically. Antony had Caesar's papers, consulship, experience, and immediate position. The assassins had aristocratic names and republican language. Cicero had prestige and rhetoric. Lepidus had troops. The situation was fluid. But Octavian had something priceless: Caesar's name. In Roman politics, names were not decoration. A name could be a claim, a promise, a weapon. By accepting Caesar's adoption, Octavian became the son of the murdered dictator. He could appeal to veterans. He could claim loyalty. He could present himself as the young avenger of a great man betrayed by nobles. He also had patience, self-control, and a talent for appearing less dangerous than he was. At first, Cicero and other senators tried to use Octavian against Antony. Cicero saw Antony as the immediate threat and believed the young Caesar could be managed. This was a classic senatorial mistake, assuming that an ambitious young man with a great name and access to soldiers would remain a tool. Octavian accepted help when useful. He built his forces. He claimed legitimacy. He played the Senate's game while preparing to outgrow it. The Republic's defenders were now trapped in a nightmare of their own making. They had killed Caesar to prevent monarchy. But Caesar's name had not died. It had passed to a younger man with fewer old attachments, fewer sentimental debts, and a colder understanding of power. If Caesar had been a brilliant improviser, Octavian would become something more systematic. The assassins had removed a dictator. They had helped create an emperor. Not immediately, not inevitably, but the road had opened. Chapter 10: The Republic tries to use its enemies. The months after the assassination were a chaos of alliances, speeches, armies, and calculations. Antony tried to assert control over Caesar's legacy and the state. The Senate, urged by Cicero, moved against Antony. Octavian positioned himself as defender of the Republic against Antony, while also demanding recognition for his own power. Battles were fought near Myutina in 43 BC. The consuls Hirtius and Pansa died. Antony was checked but not destroyed. Octavian emerged with troops and leverage. The Senate thought it could reward him, limit him, and return to normal procedure. But normal procedure was exactly what no longer existed. Octavian demanded the consulship. When resisted, he marched on Rome. This is the grim repetition at the heart of the late Republic. Again and again, politicians claimed legality until they had soldiers, and then soldiers clarified the law. Octavian became consul while still extraordinarily young. Then came the alliance that sealed the fate of the conspirators. Octavian, Antony, and Lepidus formed the second triumvirate in 43 BC. Unlike the earlier informal alliance of Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus, this triumvirate received legal authority. It was a formal extraordinary commission for reorganizing the state. In practice, it was a three-man dictatorship backed by armies. And it began with blood. Proscriptions returned. Lists of enemies were published. Property was confiscated. Men were killed. Personal grudges, political necessity, and financial hunger all merged. Cicero, who had denounced Antony and tried to guide events with words, was killed. His head and hands were displayed on the rostra. The republic that Brutus and Cassius had hoped to restore now watched a new generation repeat and intensify the violence of the past. The assassins had claimed to strike against tyranny. But the result was not liberty. It was a more organized tyranny of three. Why did Octavian and Antony join forces after opposing each other. Because power often recognizes itself. Antony had soldiers and Caesarian legitimacy. Octavian had Caesar's name and growing military strength. Lepidus had position and troops. The Senate had prestige, but prestige without command was becoming theatrical. The triumvirs understood that the real contest was not over speeches in Rome. It was over armies, money, and survival. The killers of Caesar were now enemies of Caesar's heirs. The war moved east. Chapter 11, Brutus and Cassius. Brutus and Cassius gathered forces in the eastern provinces. They had resources, commanders, and support among those who feared or hated the Caesarian faction. For a time, it was not absurd to imagine that they might win. History was not predetermined. Philippi was not written in the stars. The Republic still had men willing to fight for its name. But what kind of republic were they fighting for? This question follows them like a shadow. Brutus appears in many traditions as the noblest of the assassins, philosophical, conflicted, attached to liberty, burdened by the act he committed. Cassius appears harder, more practical, perhaps more personally resentful. These portraits are shaped by ancient sources, later politics, and centuries of literature. But the contrast remains useful because the conspiracy itself needed both types, the moral symbol and the operational mind. At Philippi in 42 BC, their armies faced Antony and Octavian. The campaign was messy, large, and decisive. 2 battles were fought. In the first, Brutus had success against Octavian's forces, while Cassius, defeated by Antony's troops and misreading the larger situation, took his own life. In the second, Brutus was defeated and also died by suicide. The liberators were gone. Their deaths gave the story tragic symmetry. They had killed Caesar to prevent one-man rule. They died fighting men who would carry Caesar's legacy forward. But tragedy should not blind us to political reality. Brutus and Cassius were not democrats in the modern sense. They were aristocratic republicans fighting for a Senate-led order that had long excluded most people from real power. Their liberty was sincere, but it was also class-bound. They feared tyranny, but they also feared a Rome in which their own class no longer controlled the terms of ambition. That does not make their cause meaningless. The Roman Republic, for all its inequalities, had preserved traditions of shared office, public competition, legal identity, and resistance to monarchy. Caesar's dominance threatened those traditions. The assassins were not hallucinating the danger, but they confused the defense of a tradition with the restoration of a functioning system. The tradition had emotional force. The system had already been hollowed out. Chapter 12, The Last War of the Republic. After Philippi, the world was divided among the victors. Brutus and Cassius were dead. The old Republican cause as a military force was broken, but the struggle for supreme power was not finished. The triumvirs had defeated the assassins, but they had not solved the problem of who would rule. Lepidus faded and was eventually pushed aside. The real contest became Octavian versus Antony. At first, they divided the Roman world uneasily. Antony took the east. Octavian consolidated power in the west. Their alliance was patched through political arrangements, including Antony's marriage to Octavian's sister Octavia, but the rivalry deepened. Antony's relationship with Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, became central to Octavian's propaganda. Cleopatra was intelligent, politically experienced, and ruling one of the wealthiest kingdoms of the Mediterranean. Antony's eastern power base and his connection to her allowed Octavian to frame him as corrupted by foreign luxury, dominated by an Eastern queen and dangerous to Rome. Again, the political lesson is sharp. Power is not only armies, it is narrative. Octavian could present himself as defender of Roman order against Antony's Eastern excess, even though Octavian himself had risen through civil war, coercion, and proscriptions. He was exceptionally skilled at making his own ambition look like restoration. In 31 BC, Octavian's forces defeated Antony and Cleopatra at Actium. In 30 BC, Antony and Cleopatra were dead. Egypt became Roman. Octavian stood alone. The civil wars that had consumed the Republic for years were effectively over. Romans were exhausted. This exhaustion matters. People do not accept autocracy only because they are deceived. Sometimes they accept it because the alternative seems like endless blood. After decades of crisis, proscriptions, confiscations, marching armies, broken alliances, and elite violence, peace itself became a political argument. Octavian understood this better than Caesar had. Caesar had accumulated honors too openly, too quickly, too personally. He made dominance visible. Octavian learned to hide revolution inside restoration. In 27 BC, he received the title Augustus. He claimed to restore the Republic, but real power remained concentrated in his hands through a careful arrangement of offices, military command, prestige, and control. The Senate still existed. Elections still existed in altered form. Republican language survived. But the Republic as an independent political order was gone. The assassins of Caesar had feared a king. They helped produce an emperor who knew better than to call himself one. Chapter 13, Was Caesar a Tyrant? The case cannot be closed without asking the question the conspirators asked themselves. Was Caesar a tyrant? The answer depends on what we mean. If tyranny means illegal cruelty without public support, Caesar does not fit easily. He was popular with many ordinary Romans. He enacted reforms. He used clemency. He had vision. He was not merely a sadist or a brute. He could be generous, brilliant, and constructive. If tyranny means the concentration of power in one man beyond the normal limits of the Constitution, then yes, Caesar was moving toward tyranny or had already reached it. He held extraordinary authority. He dominated the state. He made the Republic dependent on his person. His dictatorship in perpetuity was incompatible with the old Republican balance. But the deeper question is whether Caesar created the crisis or embodied it. The Republic had already suffered military coups, civil war, political murder, and institutional breakdown before Caesar became dictator. Sulla had shown the path. Marius had militarized politics. The Senate had failed to integrate new social and imperial realities. Popular leaders and aristocratic conservatives had escalated conflict for generations. Caesar did not murder a healthy republic. He seized a dying one. But seizing a dying republic is still an act. He chose to cross the Rubicon. He chose civil war rather than political vulnerability. He chose to hold exceptional power. He chose not to rebuild genuine shared government. And perhaps he believed that Rome could no longer be governed any other way. The tragedy is that he may have been partly right. That is what makes the assassination morally difficult. If Caesar was destroying the Republic, killing him might look like defense. If the Republic was already unable to function, killing him removed not the disease, but the symptom, and unleashed the fever. Chapter 14, Were the assassins right? Brutus and Cassius were not fools to fear Caesar. They were not ridiculous men panicking over nothing. Roman hatred of kingship was real. Caesar's honors were alarming. His power was extraordinary. His departure for Parthia might have made him even harder to challenge. If they waited, they might never get another chance. Their fear was rational. Their plan was not. They correctly identified the danger of personal dictatorship. They failed to understand the conditions that had made personal dictatorship possible. They thought the republic was being held hostage by one man. In reality, the republic had been eaten away by military loyalty, wealth inequality, elite competition, provincial empire, political violence, debt, veteran settlement, and the repeated use of extraordinary commands. Caesar was the most visible problem. He was not the only problem. The assassins also misread the Roman people. They assumed hatred of kings would translate into love for Caesar's killers. But many citizens cared less about constitutional purity than about stability, material benefits, and the end of civil chaos. Caesar's death did not feed them, protect them, or reassure them. It opened the door to uncertainty. They misread Antony. They spared him to keep the assassination morally clean, but politics punished that restraint. Antony used Caesar's memory with devastating effect. They misread Octavian. They did not see that Caesar's heir could become more dangerous than Caesar's lieutenant. They misread power itself. They believed legitimacy would flow from an act they considered noble. Instead, legitimacy had to be built, defended, funded, armed, and communicated. The assassination was a masterpiece of symbolic violence. It was a failure of statecraft. Chapter 15. What really died on the Ides? Did the Roman Republic die on March 15th, 44 BC? Not exactly. The Republic had been dying before Caesar's murder, and its final transformation continued after it. Institutions remained. Senators met. Magistrates were appointed. Armies claimed to defend republican legality. The word republic did not vanish. But the assassination killed something important. It killed the illusion that removing one man could restore the old order. Before the Ides, anti-Caesarian senators could believe that Caesar was the obstacle. After the Ides, they had to face the emptiness beneath that belief. There was no automatic restoration. There was no unified Senate ready to govern. There was no popular uprising for aristocratic liberty. There was no military consensus in favor of constitutional normalcy. The knives revealed the truth. The Republic's problem was not simply that Caesar was alive. Its problem was that too many Romans had forgotten how to lose power peacefully. Caesar refused to become vulnerable to his enemies. His enemies refused to accept his supremacy. Armies followed commanders. Politicians treated law as a weapon. The people were asked to choose between elite slogans and strongmen's promises. The Senate wanted authority without the force to sustain it. Generals wanted legality without limits. In that world, assassination could not save the Republic. It could only choose the next phase of civil war. The Ides of March were therefore not the death certificate of the Republic. They were the autopsy. They showed that the disease was everywhere. Chapter 16. The disaster that called itself liberty. The assassination of Julius Caesar is often told as a moral drama. Tyrant and liberators, ambition and virtue, monarchy and republic. But the deeper story is more uncomfortable. The liberators were right about the danger and wrong about the cure. Caesar was both a reformer and a destroyer. The Senate was both a guardian of tradition and a failed ruling class. The people were not passive fools. They had reasons to support Caesar and reasons to fear renewed aristocratic chaos. Antony was not simply a villain. He was a political survivor using the tools available. Octavian was not simply Caesar's heir. He was the man who understood the lesson of Caesar's death better than anyone. Do not look like a king. Do not ask for too much too openly. Do not humiliate the Senate unnecessarily. Keep the forms. Control the armies. Accept honors carefully. Let people call your rule peace. Augustus succeeded because he learned from the corpse in Pompey's theater. Caesar had made supremacy visible. Augustus made supremacy livable. That is the final irony. The assassins killed the man who looked like a king and cleared the way for the man who could become monarch while pretending the republic had been restored. Their victory became the republic's last great disaster. Closing monologue. The Ides of March endure because they contain one of history's most painful political questions. What if the tyrant is real, but killing him still saves nothing? Brutus and Cassius were not wrong to see danger in Caesar's power. A dictator in perpetuity could not be reconciled with the old republic, but they mistook the man for the entire crisis. They believed that Rome's liberty had been locked inside Caesar's body, and that once the body fell, liberty would step out alive. Instead, what stepped out was fear, propaganda, revenge, and another civil war. The knives removed Caesar. They did not restore trust, discipline armies, rebuild institutions, or teach Rome's ruling class how to share power again. And that is why this case still feels so sharp after 2,000 years. Political murder can destroy a person, but it cannot automatically rebuild a system. A republic is not saved by hatred of kings alone. It needs habits, limits, legitimacy, compromise, and citizens who believe the rules matter even when the rules hurt their side. Rome had lost too many of those habits before Caesar died. So what is your verdict? Was Caesar the man who killed the republic, or was he the proof that the republic was already dying? Were the assassins defenders of liberty, or aristocrats who confused their own power with freedom? Leave your verdict in the comments, and subscribe to the History Docket as we continue reopening the disasters where history turned on a decision, a fear, and a blade.